Hey there, Banditos. Thank you for joining us this week for a brand new episode in this brand new week, where, as always, we fling open the doors of your local comic book shop and talk to your favorite creators of yesteryear in the comic book world. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Warren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And today's interview is with an artist whose career spans the last 20 years and has worked on current titles. We're talking about Green Lantern, Batman Beyond, and Teen Titans. He's one of our neighbors to the north. He's Bernard Chang. Now, I'm a huge fan of Bernard's work. In my opinion, he's a pretty integral part of the New 52, in my opinion. His artwork really stands out. And look, I know the New 52 gets a lot of flack, but there is a fair amount of titles and artwork that really shine through. And his was one of those.
And for an old codger like me, I remember his work on Dr. Mirage for Valiant. It was really, I think, a book that was sort of ahead of its time, and his artwork in it was fantastic. I thought it blended so well with the stories, and it's great to hear how he's sort of evolved as an artist from then.
We had a great conversation. I love Bernard's work since Dr. Mirage. He kind of took off like a rocket ship with his, one of his first assignments there at Valiant, and then has had a very unique career. I mean, he took a break from comics at some point to join Disney's Imagineering crew, where he was kind of like a concept designer for various attractions and projects that they were doing. Came back to comics, has done a lot in DC, some in Marvel, and now is working on and is in fact completing his 12-issue series called The Monkey Prince, which is introducing a new character to the DC universe. And issue 12 comes out on March 7th, so pick it up. We talk about that first and then get into the rest of his career. So let's get to it. This is Bernard Chang. And we are joined today by a special guest. It is Bernard Chang. Bernard, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So we usually start way back at the beginning in terms of discovering comics, but we'll get to that a little later because you were in the midst of what people who are watching this on YouTube can see is your latest project, which is The Monkey Prince, which, from what I can gather, is a completely brand new character. And I'd love to know, how it came about, how the character came about, how the book came about, and what's going on up until this point in the story.
Well, the Monkey Prince is the son of the Monkey King, Sun Wukong. He's a Chinese mythological character, probably one of the most popular mythologies that have come out of China or the Far East. Is very influential in terms of like Dragon Ball Z and a bunch of other pop culture or more modern stories have been kind of springboarded off of that journey to the West chronology. And so back in, I think, 2020, late 2020, Jessica Chen, who was an editor at DC, reached out, and she had said that she wanted me to see if I was available to work on a project. Might have been early 21. The whole pandemic fog is not so great. And she wanted to see if I was interested in working with the writer Gene Luen Yang. And obviously his first book was American Born Chinese. He's also written a lot of superhero comics lately. And before she could finish Yang, I was like, oh yes, I'll sign me on board. Because I had always held him to a very high regard and wanted to collaborate with him in some kind of way. And then it became a double bonus where she was like, look, we want to try to bring Sun Wukong, the Journey to the West, into the DC universe. And for me personally, the Monkey King has a lot of roots in terms of when I was a kid. My family immigrated to the States when I was 6. And I would go with my mom to the drugstore or the supermarket every week. And I would just hang out by the comic book rack and, read all the new comics. And, I'd read one shelf one week, and then I'd next week I'll come read all, like, 5 or 6 books along the next aisle. And so my father saw that I started taking a liking to American superhero comics, Batman, Spider-Man, and I would go home and I would draw all of these characters. So he said, let me introduce you to a Chinese superhero. And he had his friends back home in Taiwan sent him the Journey to the West, which is like a thick book. There's no pictures in it. It was just words, and I couldn't read Chinese. So he would read to me bedtime stories, a few pages every night, from Journey to the West, which is a story about this Monkey King who is kind of like a trickster or prankster. He goes to the heavens. He creates a lot of havoc. He kind of does things his way. He gets ultimately caught and punished, but then he gets sent on this journey to protect this monk who has to go west to get these scriptures from the Buddha. And along the way, he has a pig demon who becomes his Pigsy, his like cohorts, and there's another Sandy who's like this sea demon, and so the four of them kind of go from east to west to go on these different various adventures. What happened too is that my father never finished Journey to the West. My parents got divorced, and so there was always this open loophole, in my life that although while Monkey King was such a huge favorite of mine, I wasn't able to finish the story because I couldn't read the book. And back then I don't want to date myself, but there's no internet. There wasn't a lot of translated stuff here in the States. So when she came up and said, we want to do a new story, a new character based off of Monkey King, and we're going to make him the son, Monkey Prince. I was like, wow, this is, all these memories and emotions came rushing back. And as an artist, as a creative, even as a fan, you want the creators to have a lot of passion for whatever project they're working on. And so I can guarantee that, Gene also had a very similar story when he was young. His mother would read to him bedtime stories of the Monkey King. And in fact, in the American-born Chinese series, the graphic novel that he drew, the Monkey King makes an appearance in his format, in his way. So it really became kind of a great opportunity that, when we were kind of fleshing out different ideas, I had the opportunity now to go back and reread the entire series and complete the circle. That was left open all those years ago.
Yeah, it sounds like a really fulfilling closing of the loop, so to speak, that was open earlier in your life.
Yeah, a lot of times you get like people ask me who's my favorite character to draw, what's my favorite book that I've worked on, and there are a lot of like favorites, characters growing up reading certain books. I gravitate towards certain artists or writers or characters or story arcs. I remember Secret Wars had kind of just come out when I first started seriously collecting comics, going to, it started out as a kid going to drugstores when they had, or newspaper stands when they would have them more readily available. But then I started discovering comic book stores as a result of that. And later on in my teenage years, I started really getting into collecting, going every month, getting a pull list, putting the comics into the bags and boards and, reading them on the table, like just one page at a time. Whereas when I'm young, the books are all like, messed up. And around that time, like certain things came out, like Secret Wars came out. And, it was also a very pivotal time, I think, in the comic book industry. How, they had these whole company-wide crossover. So it really going back to that, so yeah, sorry, I get off on these tangents. But yeah, you get like opportunities to draw certain characters, but this was really from my past, when I was a little kid, and going to sleep every night dreaming about these stories because there are no images. So I had to formulate all of these adventures in my head. Um, really had a very, very personal stroke. So I'm very grateful, to have had the opportunity and the career or just to have lasted long enough to do something like this in the industry.
Were you surprised that this opportunity came up from, of all places, DC?
I think a lot of it was the right place at the right time. I think Marvel tried a Monkey King, a Sun Wukong character a few years ago. And quite honestly, I'm kind of surprised that DC hasn't tried it earlier, because Monkey King is so popular. If you're in Asia, there's like every year, every other year, there's like a new movie about the Monkey King, or with different variations, takes from the original story. There are, of course, a lot of other Asian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean stories, myths, that also it provides a bountiful field for stories to explore. I mean, I think in comics we've really explored a lot of like Western, Greek, Roman mythology, mythological characters. But there's also this other bevy of stories of characters and adventures that are wild and crazy, and another resource to kind of tap into.
And this is set up, at least thus far, as a limited series of 12 issues, I believe, right?
Yeah, we're coming towards the end. It's right now a 12-issue miniseries. The character Monkey Prince also is making a major appearance in the current DC event called Lazarus Planet. And some of the villains and characters from the Monkey Prince is kind of affecting the DC universe. And so hopefully with continued fan support, there'll be more Monkey Prince stories. Gene and I, we actually just met up last week and a half ago for dinner, and we're like spewing out a lot of ideas or what could be the next adventures of Monkey Prince. I mean, this project in itself too has been so collaborative, and I'm so appreciative of working with Gene and Jessica on this, because before it's a 12 issues, but before every few issues we'll actually have like a Zoom call, and we'll throw out ideas, and it's been extremely collaborative and very warm in terms of we'll bounce ideas off of each other. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? So it's not just like me in a dark room working, and then they're in it's very much similar to like when I first started back at Valiant. It was a very collaborative effort, because at Valiant back then there was a bullpen, and you would go into the office and I would sit down with Bob Layton, and he would read to me, we'd read the script, the plot over, and we would discuss. He would ask me questions like, what am I thinking when I'm reading this? Maybe emphasize this aspect of the story or scenes. And so it's really great to be able to work in that kind of fashion. Now that we're on the internet, or we have the internet, and everybody's kind of all spread apart, there are projects where sometimes the writer and the artist rarely ever talk, except for maybe emails, but like physically converse with each other. And so this is a very special project, and I really do hope that the fans that are reading the books, that they really get that energy from from the work.
In my experience, that kind of energy, the collaborative spirit, really does come through on the page, and you can tell when a team is kind of focused on telling a great story, as opposed to maybe those folks that are phoning it in, or just kind of doing a quick paycheck deal. And it seems like obviously Monkey Prince is really of the former variety, and so I'm hopeful, as other fans are, that this is only the beginning of more and more for that character and those stories.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, exactly. One more question that came out of your last answer was, because you brought up how some of the characters from Monkey Prince are being drawn into the greater DC universe. Was that a part of the appeal for doing this kind of, classic traditional story that has been told in different forms before, to bring it into the DC universe and have it kind of bump up against some of those other characters and archetypes that have been around for maybe not as long, but certainly decades?
Right. I think the Lazarus Planet type level, ultimately, yes, you want to create a character or storylines that have lasting and meaningful impact. But at the same time, we really just started out wanting to explore the character of Marcus, or the Monkey Prince. And then our intent initially was really just to play off of a small handful of noticeable DC characters. In the Festival of Heroes, which is the first appearance, actually it kind of takes place not in the beginning, but towards the middle of the storyline. And, he kind of plays off as Shazam. And so, and then in this arc now, in this 12 issues, the first 4 issues is Batman Robin, where he's in Gotham. Then the family moves to Amnesty Bay, and Monkey Prince actually faces off against Aquaman, Black Manta, and the Trench. And then in this third arc, the family moves to Metropolis. So the reason being that his parents are henchmen. They work for like the various DC villains. The first arc, the parents are working for Penguin, designing and building these machines and weaponry for him. The second arc, after Penguin gets captured, I don't want to give away this ending, but they have to find a job, and they move to Amnesty Bay because Black Manta's hired them to initially work on this ship, underwater vessel. So I think it's great that he's given Monkey Prince is given the opportunity to kind of play in a bigger field. And at the same time, as we continue to develop his character, basically it's a teenage kid, just finding out that his father was the legendary Monkey King, and that he's kind of been bullied around. He's kind of moving from city to city, really having a difficult time fitting in everywhere he goes. But then now discovering that he has these powers, what does he do with them? Is he able to control them? Those are somewhat similar types of story points found in a lot of teenage superhero stories. But along with this comes the history of the Monkey King. He also has his teacher, Pigsy, who was the original Pigsy from Journey to the West. So Zhuba Jian, who was like, if you know anything about Journey to the West, Zhuba Jian is always, or Pigsy is always, kind of like Monkey Prince is comic relief, but Pigsy is also kind of comic relief because he's always super lazy and just wants to eat or, be a womanizer. And now he's like hundreds of years later, thrusted into the role of being the mentor. So I think there's very interesting dynamics going on in that relationship. So
yeah, seems like endless potential for these characters, and their place in the DC and even beyond the DC universe. But at this point, I want to kind of rewind to sort of the beginning. I mean, you did tell us a bit about how you first discovered comics, sort of with your mom, these racks. But fast forwarding to your, breaking in professionally, which you've already also somewhat touched on. And Bob Layton had a similar story about, sort of the collaborative nature of you two, particularly at Valiant. But what did it feel like to sort of break in at Valiant? Because it was, a very interesting moment in time in the industry, and this was not one of the big two that everybody sort of knew about at the time, and yet you really kind of immediately made your mark. What was that environment like at Valiant?
Okay, so I was 20 years old. I was going to college at Pratt Institute in New York City. I was majoring in architecture, so I had a scholarship in architecture. And my first year in school, I was really hating it. I went to an art high school in Miami called New World School of the Arts. My best friend in high school, John Paul Leon, was also, eventually became a comic book artist. He had gone to school at SVA, college at SVA. So we were both in New York together. I remember really disliking architecture. It was so regimented. Everything was measured, had to be so precise. And coming from 3 years of art high school, where you're painting, drawing, and, being explorative and loose, and it was just very confining. And I was thinking about transferring out. But then one day I went down to the local corner bodega, and in the bodega they had newsstands, and in the newsstands they had comics. And this was fall 99 or spring 91. And one of the comics I picked out was X-Men, double-sized, I forgot the number, 352? I don't know if that's right, where the X-Men go into the Savage Lands with Rogue and Magneto, and Jim Lee drew it. And I'm flipping through this book, I'm like, wow, holy cow, because in high school, at Hard High School, they forbid us from drawing comic books. JP and I still drew comics on the side, but we also kind of shifted, and I kind of stopped collecting as heavily as I used to. And so I wasn't really going to the comic book store as much anymore. And by the time I got to college, I was like, man, I really don't like architecture. I found this comic book and I'm like, holy cow. I remember this guy, Jim Lee, because I remember picking up that Alpha Flight book, or getting the Alpha Flight, Marvel used to do mail shipments. So I would get comic books in the mail, and I would go to the comic book store once a month to pick up other special books. And I remember his Alpha Flight book being like, wow, this is amazing. And then I'm like, oh, this is the same guy that drew the Alpha Flight book. And this stuff is, I was just thrilled reading this book. I will say also at the same time, you never really saw what the comic book artists look like. Very rare. Down in Miami, every now and then there was a comic book store I went to that had a signing. I got to meet Jim Beatty and Mike Zeck. They came down to promote the Secret Wars, and but some of the artists, they weren't they were older, and around that time in New York, I think the Rob Liefeld commercial came out, where he was selling Levi's, and I'm like, holy cow, this is a young, hip guy drawing comics, right? I always thought it was this, old, scruffy, which is kind of what I am now, right? With the beard and big belly and sitting there in the room, drawing. And was like, oh, I'm in New York City. Marvel Comics and DC Comics are both in New York City. Why not try to get a side job, drawing an issue here or there, and maybe that'll like fulfill like my urge to be, you know, drawing or creatively drawing, um, and make this kind of New York experience work out. Part of me wanted to transfer, but part of me also didn't want to transfer because I made the basketball team at Pratt, and that was like also one of my goals, is like to play college basketball. So I just started asking around campus, um, friends, hey, do you know anybody that's interning at Marvel? Do you know anybody that's interning at DC or working at Marvel or DC? How do I break in? Meanwhile, John's at SVA. He at SVA, there's a whole group of kids over there that are already tapped into the comics scene. Um, so at Pratt, I met this kid named Mike Thomas. And Mike, he was at the time, I think, interning, but he was also doing some colors for Marvel. So I knocked on his dorm room door, and I'm like, "Hey, Mike, can you get me like a plot or a script to work from?" And he's like, "Oh, okay, all right, all right." And I come back a week or two later, and Mike hands me like this Captain America script, a plot. Back then, I say script now. Back then, it was all plots. And he's like, "Here you go." So I went and I started doing some, some pages from that. John Paul at the same time, we would hang out. I'd be like, "Hey, John, I got this Captain America plot," you know. So we were like going back and forth. And eventually, John's group at SVA, they had a group called the Bad Boy Studio that was run by Michael Davis. Michael Davis was a comic book artist. He's also one of the original founders of Milestone Media. And so Michael Davis would have a class at his home once a week where he would like just talk about stories of comics, um, you know, comic book stories, like not like superhero stories, but like personal personality stories or business
Industry.
of stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what Mike really taught was the business of comics, right? So Mike was like, look, you got to have 6 to 8 pages of storytelling. Get rid of this full page splash stuff or just splash page. Just get rid of this non-storytelling material. Put it together, portfolio, be presentable. Have copies of everything with your name, address, and phone number on every page. Really began to shift in my head. This notion of, this can actually be a real thing. He's like, all these kids that go into Marvel DC looking for work, they're in a t-shirt, sneakers, and jeans, right? They're not respecting the craft. So a lot of those things, ring true, right? Look, when you're applying as a kid, especially if you're 19, 20, I was 20 at the time, 21, this is a job, this is a career. You have to address it and treat it as such, with respect. So Michael said to John and I, come out to San Diego Comic-Con 1992. He'll take us around to all of his contacts and have your portfolio ready. So John Paul and I, we saved up our money. We flew out that summer. Comic-Con's in August. Back then it was in August. And Michael took us to all of his contacts. On the very last day, it was Sunday. And back then it was only 2 or 3 days. On Sunday, right before we're going to head out to the airport, there's a booth right by the last doorway. It's Hall A. If you hear the squeaks in the back, it's my birds. I'm like, John, let's show our portfolio to these guys. It was Valiant Comics, and at that San Diego Comic-Con 1992, Unity had just come out that summer. There was a big buzz in the entire convention center. I didn't know what Valiant was at the time. I was just starting to getting back into comics. I mean, I knew Marvel DC, and that's what we were shooting for. And we had actually been offered. Michael was going to start Milestone. They're going to launch later in the fall. They had 4 books. One of the books being Static. So Michael had said, "Look, it's either going to be me or John Paul. Are going to be the 2 guys that they're considering drawing Static. So one of us was going to have work coming out of this show, but we didn't know, and so we still wanted to try to get as much out of this opportunity as possible. So we just waited in line, and Bob, Bob and Barry Windsor-Smith were there looking at portfolios. And so Bob, I was waiting in line, and I happened to go in front of Bob. He flipped through my work, and he's like, "Oh, this is pretty good. Okay, when do you get back?" I said, "Yeah, I go to school in New York, so I'll be back in September." He's like, "Yo, when you get back, come to the office, and I got some work for you." And yeah, I remember I had, stapled photocopies of my samples. I said, "Bob, would you like to keep a sample?" And he was like, "No, I don't need it." And I was like, "Oh, everybody else took samples." I said, well, okay. Anyways, we go back home. A few weeks later, I'm in New York, back in New York for school. I go to Milestone first. Well, actually, before I go back to school, Mike called me and said they're going with John. JP was going to draw Static. So it's crushing. My best friend, both of us are going for the same work. John had already started working earlier that year. He had started on a RoboCop one-shot and RoboCop miniseries for Dark Horse. So he has a lot of experience under his belt already. But Dwayne McDuffie at Milestone had said, just come in the office. We'll have maybe a backup story for you to work on. I mean, I was 20. I could do it. If you told me I could sweep up the floors, I would have done that, just to be in the industry. But when I went into the office, they're like, "Look, we don't have any work right now. We're still trying to get all the books off of the ground. They haven't pushed too far ahead to have inventory stories yet." An inventory story really is like a fill-in issue where, have regular artists will draw like 4, 5, 6 issues. Then you have probably a fill-in issue and give them a month breather to jump ahead. And I was, again, disappointed. So I remember leaving that meeting with Dwayne McDuffie, going down to the street, and then there's a payphone, and I had Bob's number written on my little Rolodex thing. So I, put a quarter in. I called Valiant. I'm like, "Can I speak with Bob Layden? This is Bernard Chang." And he's like, "Yeah, when can you come in?" I'm like, "Well, it's Monday now. Got basketball practice. Come in Wednesday." He's like, "Oh, come on Wednesday." So I showed up Wednesday with my portfolio. I had redone a bunch of the pages between the convention and then, based off of the feedback I was getting. And he's like, "Okay, great." He was flipping through the portfolio. "Okay, I remember this stuff." And then he says, "Okay, here you go. Here's your first story." And I was like, "Wow, this guy means," everybody else is just blowing smoke up my butt. Bob really, when he said something, he meant it. He's like, "I got the perfect book for you. You're going to be the first artist outside of Barry Windsor-Smith to draw Archer and Armstrong. You're going to do a fill-in issue, number 9. I think they were on like 5 or 6 at the time. I don't remember." And he's like, "Give this a read when you get home. But while you're here, Barry's office is over there. Go into his office. Barry, this is Bernard. Barry, teach Bernard how to draw Archer and Armstrong." So I was like, "Wow, holy shit." I'm, meeting Bob. Bob's getting me work, right? Bob's this legendary comic book writer, artist. And now I'm also going to sit in the same office with Barry Windsor Smith. So Barry brings me in. Barry used to draw on tracing paper a lot. So he'd take out his roll of tracing paper and blue pencil. And he's like, okay, well, this is Archer, this is Armstrong. Archer's kind of frail and skinny. He's a kid. Armstrong's this big, burly kind of guy, not necessarily fat, but just, big, like a refrigerator, boxy. You want to make sure the different silhouettes. And he's doing all these kind of blue line sketches, and then rips it out. It's okay, here you go. Go practice. So I'm holding this original Barry Windsor Smith page, and I'm like, I hand it back to him, like, could you sign this, please? And he kind of took a moment. It's like, okay, but you're a pro now, so this is the last time. So he signs BWS, hands it back, and then I leave the office. They hand me like a stack of like Valiant comics, all the way. Later I'd find like all these books are like $100 each or something. I'm just going home with like a stack of comics, and I'm walking out of there like I'm floating on cloud nine in New York City. And there's all this, police sirens or cars, sounds going by, but I'm like, it's all numb because I'm taking a next step in life. And so like that moment, even now, whenever when I think about it, it brings chills to have realized a dream, childhood dream, and basically to be, for the last year and a half, JP and I have been trying to do sample pages and showing our work around. And now I also get to join John and like be a professional comic book artist. And the first, working on the Archer and Armstrong, I would that first issue, I would go to my dorm room back at Pratt in Brooklyn, and I would read the plot. I would do a couple pages. I would do all these different layouts. I would do drawings of the scenes, and then I'd come back a week or two later, and I'd show Bob, and we sit down and talk about why I chose this angle, why, and he would make suggestions. Why don't you do it this way? Look at it over here. Watch your pacing. Make sure you have enough space or moments passing between one image to the other to be a little bit more consistent in your storytelling. But also working in that bullpen, everybody else, you have all the other artists, the colorists, the letterers are all there, the production people. Some of the other editors and writers are there. Mark Moretti, who was another editor at the time, but he also wrote and drew Eternal Warrior. He was a huge influence too. And we kind of bonded because Mark was, before joining Valiant, he was an assistant basketball coach at the University of Virginia for the women's team. So we would bond over basketball and strategy. And then, he really brought a lot of storytelling sensibility also. So it was just like, I was just trying to soak up as much as I could as a 20-year-old kid starting out. Whoever had any kind of like a minute of their time, Don Perlin would sit in his own kind of corner. I'd go over there and like watch Don draw. And then I go into the marketing department. John Hartz would be there with Fred Pierce. Steve Mazarski was the publisher, and I go and I'd sit and I'd listen to like John and Fred talk about, all right, the numbers are coming in. This is what we need to do this. We need to have this kind of promotion coming up. Paul Fairchild was also another marketing guy, Paul, and Marty Stevers. So, I'd like chat with them about what they were doing. I was just trying to soak up as much as I could in terms of just being in the moment and trying to understand as much as I could about this industry. And Valiant at that time too was just right place at the right time. that summer, Jim Shooter had just left. They had a huge kind of thing. So I missed the Jim Shooter era. There was an exodus of some of the creative talent. But then Valiant was really beginning to take off. And I remember that fall, Steve brought everybody in, all the young artists and writers and colorists and letterers, because everybody's royalty checks were, you get a huge fat royalty check on every book, on a single monthly book. And Steve would say, look, he had a big meeting with everybody, and he said, we're in an extraordinary time right now, but this is not going to last forever. So don't go buying cars and throwing this money away. Save it. And I kind of took that to heart. I mean, there were some guys that went out and bought cars. I did buy a house, but I saved up my money for the first year, and I bought my mom a house down in Miami, because we had been living in apartments and moving around. But Steve was like, he had the foresight to say, hey, look, this boom right now that we're experiencing is not going to be forever. Right. So be careful and wise with your money. Chang, who also started at Valiant at the same time that summer, although he got kind of like a month and a half head start on me in the office, because right after San Diego, he went to New York and he started studying under Barry. So Sean got off the launch first with Ride number 9, which is, I think, categorically speaking, the highest selling number 9 issue of any series ever, I think. Because they had Rye 1 through 8, and then number 9 was rebranded Rye in the Future Force, but it was number 9.
Yeah.
So that guy made, I don't know if I can say, I said it on my Twitch stream. The number keeps going up every time I repeat it, but it was close to $100,000 on one royalty check, on one issue. Number 9, not a number 1. Number 9.
Amazing.
Anyways, sorry about going off on tangents.
No, that's okay. I want to go back and ask you from the middle of the story whether you still have the sketch from Barry Windsor Smith. I still have it. It's rolled up. It's in like storage. I have like a section of. I've been meaning to like. It's up. I live in a loft, so it's like stored up in a upper part area. I've been meaning to like dig it out, but I still have it. And at that time too, it was a special time because I don't think it's ever been repeated in this industry. It's something that just a magical moment, magical few years. Yeah. And it was a wild ride. Going from a company at that time, Valiant was almost going to close. I think, they started out doing like Super Mario, WWF comics. Right. And Joe Quesada was there before, during that era. So there are a lot of people that passed through Valiant that are extremely influential in this industry today, still. And they had moved a couple of different offices. I missed the first office. The previous office was smaller, but it was next to a modeling agency, which, if you're a young guy, it would have been great. But, a lot of the artists, the writers, especially during the summer, I mean, between the fall and the spring, because I was still going to school, I would only go into the office to drop off work and to meet with Bob to talk about the scripts, plots. But then during the summer, I would stay in New York City during the summer and go in and work in the office. It was just a really fun experience because
there's a really, I guess, the camaraderie that you develop, right, with this group of misfits, these guys from all over the place, and they're all kind of like, I mean, I was the youngest guy. I was like the same age as the interns, but they were all kind of like similar age, and um, we pull pranks on each other, things like that. I don't think we're ever going to get back to a stage where there's going to be a bullpen for a comic book company. Um, it's just that I don't know if it's um, probably too costly to have that kind of overhead. Um, but so Marvel used to have a bullpen, um, and it was great because you can see day by day, week by week, an actual book being
Gotcha.
made.
Yeah.
Right. I'd see, watch over there, Tony Bedard's writing the plot, and then I'd see over here, Paris Collins is drawing it, and then uh, I'd say Andrew Wendell's inking it, and then Jade is lettering it, and then it's being prepped in the production over there with Darren Sanchez, and so, and then it's a couple weeks later, it's in the stores.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get that today, and I think a lot of comic book artists or writers probably will not experience that if they're getting into the industry now, seeing all the little things step by step, but also some of the, because of the bullpen, last minute, hey, we need to redraw this scene because we're changing this continuity, so we have to redraw this or recolor this, and so somebody will jump on it. Okay, I got it. I'll pencil it in. Somebody will ink it. Maurice will come in and finish the colors, and then they'll cut it out and then put it on the make ready and then ship it off to the printer. So
yeah, that sort of atmosphere is unfortunately probably gone as of now. I mean, we hear the stories of, this is the first time I'm hearing about Valiant's bullpen, but definitely the Marvel bullpen. And what, we hear a lot of stories about CrossGen and sort of that studio atmosphere and having kind of the collaborative shoulder to shoulder writers, artists, colorists, everybody kind of under the same roof. And it seems like, unfortunately, a bygone era, but it produced such great comics.
yeah. There was a period of time that Steve gave me the keys to the office because I would go to class during the day. I was like, Steve, can I come into the office at night and work overnight? And then, then I'll go home and sleep in the morning and go to my class. So he was like, okay. So I would go into the Valiant offices at night, and there's nobody there, and it's pitch black, and I'm just sitting there working. And then in the morning, Scott from production would come in, and he would turn on Howard Stern, and that would be like my signal to go home and sleep. And that was like, yeah. So there's a lot of like, moments and memory. CrossGen had its own kind of bullpen, but it was also in Florida, where the weather was much nicer. New York is like, it's like brutal, especially in the wintertime. In the summer, it's hot as, it's pretty hot in the summer. It's pretty cold in the winter. But it's also dynamic. In Valiant, we were up at like 13th, 14th floor. So you can see a lot of the city.
Yep.
You can hear a lot of stuff going on. And as you're drawing, you can almost imagine seeing the heroes jumping from rooftop or flying across the skyline. So yeah, it was fun.
It sounds like that. And one title I think that you were very well known for, and you got to launch a book there, right? Which is an opportunity that a young artist doesn't always get, which was Dr. Mirage, and you got such great feedback from that, and I'll just pile on to that as well to say that really stood out in terms of its in terms of its story, but the art seemed in keeping with Valiant, but also kind of a leveled up version. And I think I and other fans sort of recognize that this was kind of sort of peak Valiant when you were on that book. And what did you think when you were pitched that and really doing those stories, which were very unique, I'd say, among a lot of the superhero fare that was coming out at the time?
Yeah, I just can't again express to you how fortunate and lucky I've been. So as I'm working on the Archer and Armstrong fill-in issue, halfway through, I'm about like 10 pages in, I go in one day to drop off some pencils. Bob pulls me on the side, and he has a big grin on his face, and he's like, "I got some good news for you. And we're going to launch, we're planning on launching a new book." Back then, I think Valiant had six or eight titles, or maybe 6 books only. Solar, Magnus, right. Exo, Harbinger, Hardcore had just come out. Yeah. And so he's like, "We're going to launch a new book. We don't know really what it is right now. We're still working it out. How would you like to be the regular artist?" So I was like, wow, okay. That's, a monthly book. That's kind of what I'm doing now, 30 years later, monthly book, a book a month. Here I'm thinking like, okay, I still got 2.5 years of school left. I don't want to drop out, because I'm on a full ride. If I leave, I don't think I'm going to go back. I like playing basketball every day. I don't know if I'm going to go draw for anyone else, right? So I said to Bob, "Bob, I'll draw this book on one contingency." He's like, "What is that?" He's like, "If you make the lead an Asian American male who's not a fighter, a lover, not a fighter." Growing up in the US, there's not a lot of Asian representation, especially at that time. Everything that I would see, if I would see a face that looked like me on TV, it would be Sunday afternoon Kung Fu theater, which they would, redub old Kung Fu movies, right, from Asia. So I was like, I see if there's an Asian guy, mostly he's like Kung Fu fighting. Can we do something that's a little bit more authentic? And we can also set it in Miami. I'm from Miami. Most heroes are in New York. I can bring a little bit more authenticity to this character, provide a background. So yeah, that was it. So I go home, back to my dorm. I think I had basketball practice that night. I'm thinking, wow, did I just blow up my career at making demands? I'm 20 years old. I'm making demands already. I haven't even finished the first, my first book. So I go back a week later to drop off more pages. Bob pulls me into his office and he's like, "All right, you got your book. We'll figure it out, but you got your book." So I was like, wow, this is amazing. The story itself, I think, really is way before its time. I think that if the book came out today, I think it would be extremely popular, especially from Bob's point of view, where it's a superhero couple, but really talks a lot about marriage and love and relationships, and how they kind of battle that along with bad guys. And some of the stuff when I was younger, I really didn't. Some of the stuff I really wasn't as well keen on, but now as I But Mulder, thinking back on a lot of those stories, it's like, wow, those are pretty impactful. And so, and again, working with Bob, he would go in, he'd have the plot for me. We'd sit down, we'd go over the story, we'd go over different things. He'll come back, okay, this last issue, maybe draw this character a little bit. It's a little, looking this way, you're looking, so he really guided me along. And I don't even know if that opportunity too is really available these days. The industry as such, they're really trying to get guys that kind of plug and play. And there's not a lot of mentorships happening or guiding. And you mentioned that, there's this Valiant style. For me as an artist, I never really emulated a single artist growing up in terms of my drawing style. I liked a lot of different guys, but I kind of just drew how I saw things. There are guys that kind of get into the industry being, let's say clones, but like mimicking a particular popular style. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just kind of drew how I drew based off of my, studying, through high school and college. But Bob really helped guide me along. It challenged me to think about story over just drawing fancy poses. Because ultimately, comics, the craft of comic books or comic book artists is storytelling. And you want to be able to evoke emotion. You want to be able to get the reader invested. It's not just about drawing something that looks pretty. You have to tell a story. And so I think that's probably what a lot of sometimes you have to sacrifice like a really nice big pose for something a little bit more subtle, because that's what the moment calls for. And I actually really find some of my favorite pages or sequences that I've done throughout my career are some of the more quiet ones, where there's a lot more acting, there's a lot more story, there's a lot more movement going on in the pages, as opposed to big splash pages of people fighting and punching and kicking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would imagine those can be sometimes more fulfilling, especially, when your sort of action dominates. Sometimes it's good to have a break from that and actually, show you can get probably more emotion across in those sort of smaller, if you will, scenes.
I do think also, like, because a lot of the inkers are trained by Bob too at Valiant, so there's a lot of brush work, and a lot of the colorists are all very similar. They swap between books. That might add to the kind of a cohesive style, overall cohesive style of the line. But yeah, if you looked at the pencils, I mean, they're very different. A lot of the artists are very different back then at Valiant.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to, we've been going for a while, and I'd love to get to more comics questions, but I have to ask you about a piece of your biography or resume that just jumps out, which is your time at Disney Imagineering.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to know what a blue sky concept designer does, and then, what your experience was like there, as opposed to maybe your comic experience. Was it totally different, or were there little things that kind of overlapped or were similar?
The one overlapping similarity in both both careers were the overall attention and focus on story. When you go to Disney, when you go to a Disney ride, It's not just you get on a ride and ooh wow, so you're thrilled, and then you get off of the ride. There's story involved. So let's say, for example, when was the last time you were at Disneyland or Disney World?
A few years ago, probably about
Do you have a
4
favorite
years ago.
ride?
I always liked as a kid Peter Pan.
Okay. So Peter Pan, oh, you kind of know what Peter Pan is before you get on it, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
But there's things about the queue space where you're waiting in line,
Mhm.
and then the ride itself also tells a story. I think the Peter Pan, you're kind of moving through, I don't remember that much. You're almost like floating in the city, right? At one point,
Yeah, I think you're flying with Peter Pan and Wendy
right?
and over to
Yeah.
Neverland. Yeah.
I like to use the analogy or the example of the Indiana Jones ride. Have you been on that one?
I'm not sure if I've been on the ride. I remember seeing the stunt spectacular at some point.
Oh,
Is that
there's a
the same
stunt
thing?
spectacular. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
stunt spectacular, but there's also a ride itself. Um, and or even Space Mountain. You've been on Space Mountain,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Okay. So Space Mountain, um, it's a roller coaster. Um, it's an indoor roller coaster, and it's kind of a ride through space. Um, but there's kind of like a very small story along that with that. And as you're waiting in the queue space, you're entering a space station already. So you're surrounded by like, you're in this high-tech tunnel. You can hear like launch time, T minus 2 minutes and counting. And so once you enter that space, we're trying to bring the guest into an experience and into a particular story narrative, to take them outside from their whatever stress or problems that they have outside or in the real world and bring them into this imaginary space. And so everything you see, everything you hear, everything you smell, everything you feel uh, reinforces that story. And so by the time you get on the ride, you believe you're on a space station. Um, and you're zipping off into space, flying all around. You see the other spaceships or shooting stars, and then you land back on the um, separate space station to complete the ride. And all of that is to facilitate, at times mostly, your relationship with who you're at the park with. Because at the end of the day, you're probably going to remember more who you went to the park with, right? And it's about enjoying experiences with other people. And then the ride itself just becomes kind of the vehicle for that. Imagineering, I just finished my 4-year contract at Valiant. I was kind of shopping around. I was doing some stuff for Marvel. I was doing some stuff for Image. And I had just been hired as the head basketball coach at Pratt. So I was going to be a college basketball head coach, which I had been working diligently on too as well. And a friend of mine who is still going to Pratt said, "Hey, there's this Disney executive. He gave a lecture, and they're looking for a comic book artist to hire at Disney." I was like, okay, well, I just wanted to see. I was thinking like maybe I can submit a resume, see if they'll hire me, see if I'm a Disney level artist. And so I sent in a resume. A few weeks later, they said, "Can you send in a portfolio?" So I put together a portfolio, and I sent that in. I mailed it in to LA. I was in New York. And then a couple weeks later, they're like, "Hey, we want to fly you out for an interview." And I was like, "Oh, this is getting pretty serious." I just wanted to see if they would make an offer. So I flew out for the interview, mainly to get to bum a free airplane ticket to go out to the West Coast.
Right.
The interview goes well. I ended up taking the job offer. it was initially at Disney Interactive, designing video games.
Yeah.
But 8 months after moving out, they laid me off. So stuck out on the West Coast. Like, I'd given up the coaching job. I kind of put comics a little bit on the side. What do I do? And I had coworkers back at Interactive that were also working at Imagineering. And so this one guy, this one producer, he brought me over, and I got to meet with some people at Imagineering and started interviewing there. And they didn't have a job opening at the time. So they're kind of like, oh, well, it's not like they have a listing for a concept designer. It was just, well, we like your stuff, but what can we do with you? When I started working there, I'd go into these meetings basically as a blue sky concept designer. All you're doing is coming up with ideas, right? You just sit there and you come up with ideas. And then those ideas, you have to present them in a format, like whether it's a drawing, whether it's building a physical model, or doing like a 3D computer render. And so I'd go into meetings. You'd have like creative charrettes, brainstorm meetings, and it was very, very like skunk works, kind of like secret ops type, because you would get on these projects and they would be top secret, right? So I worked on like a project for almost a year, and I couldn't talk to anybody else in the company on what I was doing. And these rides and theme parks, they take years to develop.
Yeah.
Disney develops all the tech, most of the technology for the rides themselves, and they develop all the rides from ground up. So the difference between like Disney and Six Flags or something is that, there are companies that build roller coasters, right? So Six Flags would go to like a company that builds roller coasters, and, they'll order off of the shelf, this super roller coaster that they super fast one, and we'll paint it green and then call it the Hulk. Yeah, it's really simplifying it, but whereas Disney would be, they spend years and years. So Disney would develop everything from the ground up. And so as a concept designer, you're starting with a blank piece of paper. What they call blue sky is that there's no ceiling. So whatever you come up with, don't be afraid to come up with the wrong thing, because there is no kind of wrong thing, because even if it's not what they want, you begin to build the outside of what the inside could be, or the idea, right? Because a lot of these meetings, they don't know. They're just like, well, we want to maybe work with this company, and we maybe want to do this kind of a ride or experience. What is it? And I'd go and I'd have a couple of days to think about something, do some research, and then come back with some kind of drawing or presentation, and then pitch. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it was also a different kind of work, because it was very isolating. These top secret projects, like I'd go to lunch, and I go to lunch with like other coworkers, and it's only natural you'd ask, hey, what are you working on? What's going on these days? And I'd be like, well, I can't really talk about what I'm doing, because even though they might be a Disney employee, they might be another Imagineer. You're not supposed to talk to them about the high level concept work, because they could hear the idea. A week later, they get a job offer to go to Universal. They go to Universal, and then they say, like, hey, I have this idea for this, and then Universal builds it first. Whereas Disney has invested all this money in me or in this project. So it becomes very competitive. But as far as jobs, it was like I'd go into these meetings and it'd be these boardrooms, and everybody would be introducing themselves, and these all people that work that designed rides that I went on as a kid. So it would be like going into a room where Bob would be there, Barry would be there, but then also like Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Jim Lee, all these guys would be in the same room as a whole. And then being able to walk inside Imagineering, in the offices, they have like other warehouse offices in the back where they have sometimes they have old rides, they have this big Dumbo vehicle that's empty. And then also just new tech, and you can walk into the other offices and look at like kind of what the other, at that time, Disney California Adventure was about to open. Though a year or two from opening. And so you can really begin to see like all the different stages of how a ride or a park itself gets developed. All the different variations, from initial very early concept to finished build.
Sounds absolutely fascinating, and something that I would imagine not a lot of others, if any, have any other comic artists have sort of experience. But yeah,
I mean, it was also an office, so I had my own office with a door. It was like right down the hall from Marty Sklar, who's like, like a legend. Oh, not Marty Sklar. His was downstairs. But so it was also kind of different from like Valiant. Valiant was like bullpen, right? At Disney, I had my own office, and it was much more like a 9 to 5, right? Whereas as a comic book artist, you kind of set your own hours. So a lot of times I'd like to work overnight. But there at Disney, they want you there during the day. So, and it's a corporation. So really, you get to experience corporate life. At Disney, I mean, I had a great time there. The company is so big. They have their own bank for employees. They have their own sports league for employees. Oh, there was like an internal Disney basketball league, and there was an internal Disney softball league. So it was a lot of fun.
Amazing. Well, Bernard, we've gone through a lot, and I still have a bunch of questions, and I hope you'll come back sometime. But in the meantime, I'd love to know if there's any. We know you're doing, Monkey Prince. You have a couple more issues to go on that. Anything else fans could look forward to, or are things kind of under wraps for now? I know sometimes you can't talk about upcoming projects.
There's some stuff I can't talk about. I mean, I have a Twitch stream with Sean Chen and Jerry Ma, who's also a comic book artist. And we do that every Tuesday. It's on Twitch and YouTube. You can watch it for free. Where I do a drawing, and then we talk about, some of these old stories or topics that are happening in comic books every week. And so that's going on right now. But I think this is a very kind of a pivotal moment or pivotal time in comics, at least in terms of American superhero comics. There's so much great stuff that's out there, and beautiful work that's being created. I wish sometimes I could be like a kid again, because there's so many things. The superhero comics, there's different variations of those traditional characters. And there's also a lot of independent comics out there. And now you have access to foreign comics. So I think when I go to these comic book conventions, around the world now. It's truly heartwarming to meet a lot of these fans. We might not speak the same language, but we all share the same love and passion for these characters and stories. So it's great. I mean, comic books, comics, we grew up reading them and loving them. And now I get to continue, being that as my career. I think it's, I've been very fortunate. I guess the only other thing I could ask for is a little bit more height. But I think my basketball playing days are much or very far behind me. So, but thank you for your time. I mean, Michael, where are you based?
I am personally in Boston. The other two members of the team are in New York. I don't want to call it upstate New York because they're just outside of the city in Westchester County.
Okay.
Yeah. And where can fans find you other than this? We'll definitely put links to the Twitch/YouTube Tuesday events. But where else can fans follow what you're doing?
Instagram, the Bernard Chang. So all the social media is the same handle, the Bernard Chang.
Bernard Chang.
Yeah, maybe see me on a basketball court somewhere. I'm actually going to go play ball right now. Once I leave, once we get off the the podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Or fight traffic first, and then go play basketball, and then come back and work. There's still a lot of drawing, and but hey, I mean, I don't have any complaints, right? I get to draw superheroes and spandex for a living.
Exactly.
It's a lot of fun.
It's a pretty amazing career, and one that a lot of people, including myself, are pretty jealous of.
Hey, welcome back. And I think we need to address the fact that this was a mostly or mainly Mike episode.
Mike on the mic.
Mike on the mic. I'm sorry.
Where we decided to go with.
I think that's what we're going for. Mike on the mic.
The branding's still a little fuzzy.
Yeah, we're working through it. We'll get there. Either way, it was a great episode. I loved hearing about Bernard's work. Look, anyone that can go from comics to Disney and back again, I guess, is just pretty damn cool. So, Mike, as always, great job.
Yeah, I agree. Mike did a bang up job, and it's so cool to have Bernard on. And I mean, he's genuinely, in every aspect of the word, an artist, whether it's comics or you said the engineering and other projects he's worked on. His work and his creativity has really made so many wonderful things happen.
I was very impressed by all of the stories that Bernard brought to the table, including those early Valiant years, how he broke into the business. And then he also, one thing we didn't touch on in these intros and outros is his work on book design and album design as well. So he's got that in his back pocket. So kind of a multi-talented individual. Would love to have him back, hear more about what he's working on. But again, pick up that 12th issue of The Monkey Prince when it comes out. And we appreciate your listening. We appreciate your views. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. And we will see you next time.